This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is May 21st, 2025.
I'm Stuart Lonnebaum.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. I'm tired today. I'm weirdly tired today. Had a good long weekend. It's busy with little kids. Maybe it's just because I went on a short bike ride and I'm just horribly out of shape. I don't know. How are you?
Less tired.
That's good. I don't know why. Yeah. It's just all hitting me right now as we sit down to record. Luckily, it's post-long weekend, so not a lot happened. We will get into how we no longer have the downtown east side advisor we didn't know we had. Carney's flip-flopping all over the place, and Alberta's flirting with separatism. Maybe we'll get into a bigger discussion there since it's a lighter week. Go to patreon.com/politicos, support this podcast, and get access to the Slack channel to continue the conversation. Let's start in BC here with the only story of the week. The legislature's not sitting this week. David Eby's in Yellowknife for a conference, but it came out kind of late last week and then early into this week that there's a special advisor appointed by the Premier to help figure out what's going on in the downtown east side and what needs to change. And he's been having meetings, and it was never officially a secret, but the opposition pointed out, hey, this Michael Bryant guy has been getting $150,000 over a year, might go as high as $300,000, and there was never any announcement of his hiring or what his job actually is.
No, in fact, the first time I heard anything about this was when someone posted in the Slack complaints from various stakeholders about the fact that they hadn't even talked to this person yet.
Michael Bryant
that was, a couple days ago.
Yeah, Bryant, for those who are unfamiliar, is a former Attorney General from the Ontario Liberals. After that, he had a literal run-in with a cyclist where he hit a cyclist with his car after an argument, and the cyclist died. His car killed this cyclist, and charges were filed against him and then dropped. And that pissed a lot of people off, understandably. He had a bout of alcoholism, I think around the same time, kind of came back a few years later saying he's had his road to redemption. He got hired on as the Canadian Civil Liberties Association executive director for a few years. Then he was the director of BC Legal Aid. And then he was gone out of that role and he appeared at this role. About the time he left Legal Aid BC, there was a Auditor General report suggesting they weren't doing great at matching the number of lawyers they needed to the amount of applicants, and there were other systemic issues happening, but it's unclear if that's why he left. But apparently while he was working for Legal Aid, he got to know David Eby pretty well and they got along merrily, and Eby's like, hey, you're a fresh set of eyes who'd be great for the downtown east side. We just don't need to tell anyone about it. What the hell?
Yeah, that's that's quite the backstory. There's room to give some benefit of the doubt if we're going to be serious about presumption of innocence and everything. But even so, you think you'd want to at least be upfront about some of that stuff, because those questions will come out. And yeah, it's a messy backstory. How this came about is messy. It later got reported that, there's not going to be some big public policy report on what should be done about the downtown east side. It's more like a strategic advice contract. There's not even really an obligation to deliver something. So this isn't, we've appointed someone to head up a commission and we'll write a big report on this, and it's a big public thing. Yeah, it all feels a little sketchy.
Minister of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, Sheila Malcolmson, was asked also why, her ministry has a clear role in this. Why didn't she announce it? And she said or at least her staff said, there was a communication problem between her ministry and the Premier's office for why this wasn't announced, which, like, everything about this story has only raised more questions, which got to the point yesterday where David Eby holds a little press conference to say this debate over Bryant is, quote, distracting, so we've terminated his contract. We're not on the hook for any additional severance or, broken contract fees. In total, we paid about $75,000 to him. So don't worry about it. It's all gone.
Yeah, that'll probably put to bed some of the immediate discussion on this, but if the opposition's smart, they're filing FOIs. Does BC have members' questions the way the feds do? I'm not actually sure on that one. If that's a tool that's available, they're doing that. There's probably still some room to dig on this, but it will at least momentarily stop the bleeding on it.
Yeah, the government, it looks like, did give the contract over to a few media outlets. I saw BC Today, a supporter of the show, saying that they've seen the contract, and I'm sure other media outlets have. It's like the whole thing just raises more questions, because, like, if this guy was going to do something substantive, you should be able to defend that. But then firing him so quickly goes, well, what was the point? What are we doing?
Yeah, and there's there should be something substantive. The downtown east side is being a challenge for decades at this point. Over the years, billions of dollars have flown into various programs and direct transfers to individuals there. And, it's worse than ever. There is clearly room for a big rethink on how things should be handled there, because the status quo is not working. But this doesn't seem like it was ever going to get at it.
Yeah. I'm not opposed to a review, even having it through some external advisor who, in David Eby's own words, comes in fresh and just, has some experience at different elements of it. That all makes sense, but kind of undermined the project by not announcing it at all. It didn't necessarily need a big fanfare, but just everything went weird, and now that it's gone, it goes, well, okay, what is the plan then? Is there a plan? It seemed like you were starting to develop a plan, but now you've killed that. What are we doing here?
Well, starting to develop a plan might be a little generous here, because from what we've heard, it didn't seem like a lot of work actually got done on this, despite that $75,000 going out the door. I've seen reporting that in addition to the various nonprofit organizations that work in the area not having been talked by him, Vancouver Police Department apparently haven't had much communication with him either. Where's the work on any of this?
Don't have a good answer for you. Yeah.
I'm a little concerned there isn't going to be a good answer on that one.
Kind of.
Or even a bad answer.
Kind of the reality with so many consultants, it seems. I'm sure he would have had a report that recommended more consultants be hired to deal with things, but I'm just being cynical. Yeah. Not much more to say on it other than just a very weird story that the province did react to quickly on, to their credit, but didn't, at least to deal with the issue. But it still leaves too many questions for me as to how did we get here? Where are we going next? What are we going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again in this way? Everything is just a little weird about it. Let's jump to federal politics then, where things aren't so weird. They're just kind of getting back into the groove of, new prime minister, new cabinet, new mandate. We know that we're not going to see a budget this spring, despite some earlier talk about it. We were potentially going to have a fall economic statement, but now it's going to be a budget this fall that is comprehensive, effective, ambitious, and prudent. Even the things that are contradictory, it will do.
Yeah, I don't even know where to begin on this one. So this obviously follows the controversy we talked about last week about them not announcing the budget. It's still been like 400 some odd days since we had the last budget introduced. Yeah, something that's, I think, pretty much only ever happened during, 2020 when there was COVID. And I don't know, maybe there was something in like the 40s or something where one didn't get passed right away or whatever. But, it's rare to go this long without one. And particularly for we gotta get stuff done quickly, do big things. This seemed like really underwhelming, weird, not what should be done, and discordant with the general proposition they put forward during the election campaign. So good on Carney for reversing this and getting something out. I still don't see why you couldn't have done it in the summer like was originally planned. Yeah, budgets take a lot of work, but that's the sort of thing you have a lot of people in finance that are continuously working on stuff to do. And yeah, maybe it's not going to be the 400 pages that has a little something for every interest group that has ever talked to a Liberal MP, but you can at least get something focused on key priorities there and, sprinkling a few other goodies here and there. That ought to be able to be knocked out in a couple months with the work that has no doubt already been done at finance.
Yeah, that's kind of the key thing, right? Is most governments, their first budget is like 80% the last guy's budget. And then they tweak enough to bring it their own.
Throw in a few things from their election platform, which...
Exactly.
That's the other thing is you have people in finance who will have gone through the platforms and at least sketched out kind of okay, if this group gets elected, these are what the Liberals are going to want to do. So we'll, figure out kind of what that would entail for us. We need to incorporate that the budget. Same thing for the Conservatives. I don't know, maybe they do it for the NDP, though. What's the point of there? But there's at least the work that will have already been done on it to integrate the party platforms into some kind of planning process. So it's not even like they have to hit the ground running. Now, that would have been going on to some degree or another during the caretaker period and shortly after.
Mm-hmm. So, they are still talking about passing their tax cut, which I guess will just be completely uncosted. And we'll have, other than what was costed in the estimates in their platform.
Are they even going to bother with the full legislation, or are they just going to do what we've learned they can do, with just put forward a Ways and Means motion, let the CRA change their collection, and then get around to passing the legislation later?
Why not? It actually makes a lot of sense to do it that way, not going to lie. That's, what he signed in his office, perhaps. Oh, well. It's frustrating, and I guess in theory, all of the other MPs in Ottawa, when the House finally meets, could get together and vote down the government because they technically have enough seats. Although once that one Conservative resigns on the first day he's allowed to, those numbers start to get really awkward because they get really close to equal. And it's not very unlikely, I think, that we'll see anyone want to go to an election, or I don't know.
Well, I can see the Conservatives. The NDP might not want to while they figure out their whole mess as that party's imploding on itself over
everything.
The appointment of an interim leader. Come on, guys. There's 7 of you. How can you not figure this out in a way that doesn't blow up into national stories in the Globe? But
because I think the leadership of the party is highly incompetent, if you've noticed anything from the last several years, Scott.
Yeah, no argument there.
To the point that they didn't even talk to all of those 7 members. And I think this was the latest in a string of grievances that are probably a mix of justified and ideological and many other things. But it's a mess. It's a hot mess of a party. That answers that question. It's not just about Don Davies. I don't actually think anyone dislikes Don Davies in the party in terms of him being... They just wanted to be asked.
Yeah, but either way, yeah, they're not likely to want to go to the polls. Although, I think in the constitutional nerd sense, not necessarily what politicians will actually do. So there's a solid argument that if the government is not going to actually put forward a budget in an appropriate time frame, that there is an obligation to vote non-confidence at that point, considering the whole premise of the system is that money to fund the government has to come from the legislature and that is in fact a expression of their confidence in the government. For practical political reasons, that was not going to actually turn into something.
They'll probably
seriously undermine it.
They'll probably have to bring a supply bill, like something that approves spending, even if it's not a full budget. Just say we agree this much money will get spent. Like, the Conservatives don't seem to want an election. They've talked about working with the government, although it would be very funny if all the opposition did bring the government down and the Governor General gave the leader of the Conservatives in the House the opportunity to test the confidence, and Andrew Scheer became Prime Minister out of all of this.
Would he, though? Because Carney got sworn in as Prime Minister, like a month and a half to 2 months before he actually had a seat?
Yeah. I'm just, it's not going to happen, but it's all funny to think about. It probably would be Poilievre. In any case, the real Prime Minister, Carney, as you mentioned, has his cabinet. He's released his mandate letter, singular, as in he has not given us specific mandate letters for each minister, just a generalized letter of what his government and ministry is expected to do. It's still interesting, but it kind of reads like the boilerplate intro of every mandate letter we've read for the last 6 years or whatever, 10 years that they've been doing them federally and provincially.
Yeah, that's the first time I can ever remember since the mandate letters became a thing that got released to the public, where they just had a single mandate letter. I kind of like it in the fact that, in the past they would put some boilerplate at the front about what the government's top priority is, but the bulk of the thing would be, a laundry list of things for the minister to do. I kind of like we're going to be focused on just a few key priorities here, and we want everybody to be moving forward on those priorities. That said, it still leaves some room to be desired. For example, if you're the Minister of State for Sport, is that still a portfolio? I guess it's Secretary of State now, just renamed him for some reason.
Because Britain does it this way.
If you're the Minister Secretary for Sport or whatever that thing is called now, it doesn't give you a lot of leeway because you're probably not going to have a significant role at that point in, strengthening the Canadian Armed Forces or building more housing, which are both items on the list. Well,
and here's the thing. I do like those individualized mandate letters, and I know a lot of activists and lobbyists in the private and nonprofit sector look to those because the 7 priorities mentioned here, which I'll get into in a second, are very broad and vague. And knowing how the Attorney General is going to make Canada safer, for example, reinforce law enforcement, secure our borders, these kind of things, what specifically are they going to do? And those more nuanced mandate letters do provide some of that, like which of the platform promises are the priorities, because they had lots. They had more than 7. It's nice to focus on 7, but one of them is bringing down costs for Canadians and helping them get ahead. What the fuck does that mean? Actually, is that just a tax cut?
Yeah, on the other hand, I've definitely heard criticism be leveled at the mandate letters previously that they were basically little more than communication tools for stakeholder management and didn't prioritize enough, give clear enough direction, or everything ended up being decided by the PMO anyway.
What is this but a communication document, Scott? That is more vague. The 7 priorities. Number 1, establish a new economic and security relationship with the United States and strengthening our collaboration with reliable trading partners and allies around the world. Language lifted straight from the platform. Stuff they're also reiterating in terms of the Golden Dome missile defense program that was in the news today.
Although, yeah, that does not strike as much as a new economic and security relationship with the U.S., so much as feels like something that would have been done at other points. You know, one of the things that's reported on that was that, Canada first expressed interest back when Bill Blair was defense minister and Trump was not yet in the White House.
For the first or second time.
So I don't think Bill Blair at D&D overlapped with Trump 1.
Right. The
but
Biden era.
Yeah. But yeah, like that particular announcement over the last couple days, or more like off-the-cuff remark in the Oval Office, followed by a confirmation press release from Canada. Yeah, that does not feel so much new as more of a continuity thing.
Number 2 in this mandate letter, building one Canadian economy by removing barriers to interprovincial trade and identifying and expediting nation-building projects that will connect and transform our country. This one's actually interesting because I feel like there was a paragraph in here about, building enormous amount of new infrastructure at speed not seen in generations. It's a lot of stuff pulled from their platform, but it's not specific about what we're going to build or what barriers we're going to remove. But, broadly good. Kind of the takeaway from all of these. Broadly good. I already mentioned 3, bring down costs. Number 4, make housing more affordable by unleashing the power of public-private cooperation, catalyzing a modern housing industry, and creating new careers in skilled trades.
Do we need new careers so much as just fill the gaps in the existing career paths that were currently understaffed? And there are shortages there?
New careers for new people. People who didn't have those careers will now have them in a new way, I guess. I don't know.
It's vaguely worded.
Not mentioned in that framing, or it's at least not clear unless it's catalyzing a modern housing industry, is his idea of the national builder, the public sector developer. Instead, it's a...
Yeah, I think that's kind of bundled in there, but it's not directly identified.
Yeah. Number 5, protecting Canadian sovereignty and keeping Canadians safe by strengthening Canadian armed forces, securing our borders, and reinforcing law enforcement. Something a lot of governments have liked to talk about. I mean, few have had to directly say we need to protect Canadian sovereignty because it's kind of implied, but now it's been an overt threat. Yeah.
A little more front of mind.
Not many details still. Number 6, attracting the best talent in the world to help build our economy while returning our overall immigration rates to sustainable levels. We want fewer but better immigrants, Scott. It's the only way to read that, right?
Yeah, well, in recent years, particularly under the last bit of the Trudeau era, the economic category of immigration fell as a portion of it all. And I read this as we want to return to more of that focus where the immigration system is targeted towards it's fulfilling the national interest when it comes to strengthening the economy.
And finally, number 7, spending less on government operations so Canadians can invest more in the people and businesses that will build the strongest economy in the G7, which is a lot of buzzwords to say austerity.
I mean, we'll see on this what the top line spending numbers are. I know we've mentioned this quite a few times, but the public sector grew a lot under Trudeau. I think it was if I'm remembering right, a 40% increase. You did not see the government become 40% more effective at delivering what it needed to deliver. There's definitely some room to take some of that money that was used to pad payroll and direct it towards things that actually result in stuff getting built for people to use.
Well, they're going to solve it by making government more productive by deploying AI at scale and focus on results over spending. Deliverology is back.
I mean, I really do like that second. I do like that second one a lot. There's one of the very annoying things about Canadian governments, and this is true federally, but also provincially and somewhat locally, is that there's a tendency to confuse announcing the project as the result or announcing the amount being spent as the big accomplishment in it rather than actually delivering the thing. We're going to spend, I can't remember the number, $20 billion on superclusters, and then the superclusters basically never happen. And that has been a story we've heard time and time again, particularly over the past 10 years, but has been a thing that has happened before that too. And getting to a situation where that initial announcement doesn't really matter, but the thing that really does matter is actually getting the end result would be a very welcome change. I have very little confidence that the people that have spent 10 years doing the opposite as an overall group are going to suddenly do a 180 on that just because the person at the top of the org chart has been swapped out. But, if they can manage to do that, great.
Yeah, it's all a lot of big promises and vague language without... It's why we need the specifics. We got the platform. I don't know. I think we probably spent too much time on this letter on its own, but we're trying to get a sense of where he's going, and all I can see in here is the platitudes and the AI will solve our spending issues, and that doesn't give me a lot of optimism, Scott. I've been playing around with some AI research, and some of it's impressive, but none of it I trust enough to everything I have pulled from it is it's 80 to 85% great, which is pretty impressive. But that fixing that 10 to 20% takes almost as much work as just doing it myself. So
yeah, there's been some interesting stuff done in more niche applications. I think protein folding had some pretty big breakthroughs that came as a result of AI. The figuring just out how to fold them has gotten a lot better, in part thanks to AI.
Notably not a big focus of the public sector in Ottawa.
No, but
protein folding.
the point is, it has a lot of potential, and it is still a pretty early stage technology. It's been around for less than 5 years. Electrification took 30 plus years to really show up in the economic productivity statistics. Since once the technology started to get underway, famously in the 90s, some economists remarked that you can see computers everywhere except in the economic data. It just often takes a little time for the technology to bear fruit, but when it does, it tends to pretty far eclipse the initial prediction if there's something there to it, which I think there is for AI. There's also some kind of scammy startup stuff that's more vaporware than anything else, and it'll be important to figure out what's what. But overall, don't mind that they're looking at ways to do it, but it needs to be done smart, and the history of this country with big IT projects is not reassuring.
It's got a little bit, or at least a little bit of what I'm afraid of, is it goes down the Department of Government Efficiency type, we're going to just start hacking and slashing and let computers solve things that really do require human input. And so I suspect it's going to be an ongoing battle between probably the public sector union, PSAC, various tech skeptics out there, of which there are many, and who are quite vocal, ironically, online, and the government trying to push this forward, and some of the like booster, which I'm not accusing you of being, but the borderline grifters trying to push it. So we'll keep our eye on that. The housing stuff, let's turn to that though, because that's mentioned in here as one of the key planks, making housing more affordable. Now, Scott, does making housing more affordable mean making it cheaper?
Yes.
Yeah, obviously.
There really should not need to be anything more than just a simple yes/no question and answer on that. Because, yeah, of course it does. Like, almost every home that is bought and sold this year was already in existence on January 1st of this year. The vast majority of the housing stock that changes hands in any year is pre-existing stock, because we only build a small amount of new homes every year relative to the overall supply of housing. So, of course, if you want to change the overall market, you can't just focus on driving down the cost of new builds. It's one of the most common errors people make when talking about housing is focusing on the sale price of the newest construction rather than the overall market. But, that didn't stop the Prime Minister from saying a lot of words that basically, at the end of the day, amounted to, I kind of agree with what Gregor Robertson was saying the other week of, we're not going to try and decrease the price of anyone's home.
Yeah, I'll link to a piece from David Moskrop that kind of explores the nuances of Carney's extended quote, which, he gets a bit aggravated when people push him on yes or no, should house prices go down? It seems like the dream scenario for the Liberals is house prices stay flat. So no one loses equity, but we're able to introduce new ways into the market. We're able to make new builds slightly cheaper through cutting GST and DC developer fees by cities in half, as they have promised to do in the next couple of years, and use all of that new ways to get people into housing, or at least kind of a two-tier housing, I don't know. But otherwise protect people's equity and grow wages, and everything works out magic. David Moskrop, like both of us, I think is kind of skeptical that this will actually work because, for example, houses in my neighborhood, $1.3 billion, not exactly affordable to the average person who doesn't have a lot of family wealth to tap into, frankly. And honestly, there are, a lot of weird things happening in the market right now. We're seeing more news stories about unsold properties. My neighborhood has a dozen houses on the market and only one has sold in the last 90 days. So it seems like...
Yeah, that's the early signs of a market correction.
Yeah.
And that the prices are going to go down. Which, good. That should happen. But yeah, if we're going to do the whole thing steady and wait for inflation to take care of it, that's going to be a 4 or 5 decade process. And that basically screws a couple generations out of ever owning a home. And, since rental homes and owner-occupied homes are substitutes for each other, that also implies that rents will stay high for a long time too. So that's a drain on that, as on their bottom lines as well. Yeah, it's basically we want to make the boomers and some of the Gen X happy, and, screw the millennials and the Gen Z and everyone that comes after them. Maybe we're on Generation Alpha now. Maybe the Generation Gamma will be able to afford a home.
To Carney's credit, he did say to the question, I want house prices to be more affordable for Canadians, which is not fully clear, but as Moskrop argues, it's a simple soundbite answer, the political answer that does meet what people expect and want to hear without being like, houses will be free or much cheaper. They'll be half the price they are right now. And then, still relatively unaffordable for many people, but there'll be some units that will be within realm of possibility. Like, it's a difficult situation, but it always has been, and we've come back to this many times on this podcast, that housing policy is not a quick or simple fix. Like, even if you do all the YIMBY stuff overnight, it's going to take a while to build those homes. And developers get disincentivized to build if they're not able to sell for as much. So you need...
Yeah, it's part of the reason why it's so important to take the development taxes down quite a bit, is because they effectively put a very high floor based on the current rates under how cheap new housing can be in the country.
And nothing Carney said in there also talked about non-market and other solutions, things he did talk about in the campaign and in the platform, like a public sector builder and other ways that we can challenge the market with the mass power of spending that the federal government has. And even if you put, a lot of effort and money into that still is going to take time. So
yeah,
like the only overnight way to make housing affordable is to destroy people's equity in a way that no politician will likely ever want to do intentionally.
Yeah, but ideally you should be aiming to take, some single-digit percentage off each year on that, and have not a crash, but a downward slope to the graph for sure. And to circle back to the generations point from a few minutes ago, yeah, it'll help the boomers out, and they turn out to vote more than the younger generations, but in terms of raw demographics, millennials outnumber them, and that's only going to increase going forward. So the politics of it get real challenging when you were elected in part on a we're going to fix housing, and your first steps out of the gate are to signal your disinterest in that and then continue to not deliver on it. So, yeah, maybe he's not going to piss off the homeowner vote, but he's creating further problems for himself down the road if there isn't something more done on this.
I mean, he did say he's going to do things. He did talk about slashing developer fees. He did talk about incentivizing supply. So it might be he's just tiptoeing around so people don't get mad at him that his policies will. And, maybe he's just purely playing politics to avoid outraged boomers.
I know,
but we haven't seen his policies yet. Parliament has not been recalled. We can't say he's failed. I'm
not saying he's failed. I'm saying he's setting himself up if he carries this on. And yeah, maybe tiptoeing around the boomers, but there were quite a few people who were pretty pissed off about these sets of comments too. So it's a change in political landscape where it used to be you don't touch home prices, third rail. It'll create just a huge backlash if you do. But now you're in a situation where there is going to be a very large contingent that's going to be pissed off if you don't, and that's just going to make it very tough to navigate.
Well, speaking of tough to navigate, maybe let's close off with a bit of a discussion on what the hell is happening in Alberta. I grew up in Alberta, so I have some sense and I visit regularly. It has been a discussion of basically every podcast that talks politics in Canada at this point, from, Hurly-Burly to the Beaverton.
Definitely came up in the last couple episodes of The Line. It's getting a lot of play. So, presumably pretty much everyone listening's up on it. But, the long and the short of it is, said she was going to basically change the Alberta referendum rules to lower the threshold significantly. Still a fairly high bar, but takes it from a almost impossible to just a difficult lift on that. And at the same time, there's being a bunch of talk in that general ecosystem about Alberta separatism, and all of it together comes to the point where it's looking like there's more of a concerted effort here than there was, 5 years ago when the Wet'suit Party was temporarily a thing.
Yeah, there's a new Alberta Republican Party whose leader, I don't remember his name, but he was a prominent organizer within the UCP who left that party in the last year, citing his anger and frustration at the direction of the party, as seems cyclical in Alberta politics, especially on the conservative side. He's going to run in a by-election that's coming up to replace the speaker who's going off to take I forget what role he's taking. I think an ambassador type role or a trade
it's mission. A quasi-diplomatic. It's basically an outreach position.
Yeah.
For Alberta in the U.S., I think.
I don't think he stands much of a chance, this Republican guy, for winning. But, you look at their party, and it's a mix of, younger conservatives. There's some, there's Art Hanger, who was a conservative MP for, 20 years, maybe 25 years. He was Reform and then Alliance. Real reactionary guy. Right wing for the Reform Party. Guy who wanted to bring back corporal punishment, caning shit at one point. Their whole party is centered around faith, freedom, and liberty, and they're talking openly about Alberta should separate from Canada and join the US. Meanwhile, I think they're trying to organize, and people connected to them are trying to organize to plan their referendum. And they're talking about a question that's simply, do you support Alberta having more sovereignty? Which is vague in reality, if you actually start to think about it. Because what does sovereignty mean? Does it mean you're your own country? Because these people who are pushing the referendum also think they will get to keep the Canadian pension plan and Canadian citizenship.
Yeah, that last one's been particularly interesting. It spurred a fair bit of discussion online. The one of the senators from Alberta posted something that basically amounted to a "no way in hell is that going to happen." Let's see if I can dig up the actual quote here.
It was Christopher Wells, right?
I think so. Yeah, I can assure you no Canadian passport, no citizenship, no pension, and no future if you want to leave Canada. That drew a surprising amount of backlash from people I was not expecting. Andrew Leach, who's, generally a pretty sensible, middle-of-the-road guy who has, very little patience for the UCP and their shenanigans, let alone separatism stuff, reacted pretty negatively to that, as did several others, basically coming out with the view that, nobody should lose their citizenship because they vote a certain way in a referendum, which I don't think it's the voting, it's what happens after the referendum that's actually the important part in all of that. But nevertheless, it drew some really interesting lines on that.
Well, and part of the challenge is we don't know what happens after a referendum. Number one, we have some precedent about questions and how should the question even be asked. That was the whole post-1995 issue of the Supreme Court reference and the Clarity Act, which brought the clarity of, a clear question and a clear majority is whatever Parliament agrees it is. So I can't wait for
just on that, a
the
slight
federal
correction
conservatives to have to weigh into it.
To what was said a little earlier. I did pull up a Calgary Herald piece here about the referendum trust. And with the Alberta Prosperity Project, which is one of the groups involved in this, wants to have for the question is, do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? So in their defense, I don't think you get much clearer than that. As far as a question goes, that's fairly clear-cut on there.
But then they also seem to think we can still have...
Yeah, it's all the bullshit that goes around
CPP
that.
and...
This is the... They're basically trying to do a rerun of Brexit where they promise all this stuff they cannot possibly promise on it. Everybody gets their cake and eats it too, a pony in every yard kind of thing, which is like obviously bullshit, but it's the sort of thing that means referendum campaigns can go a little squirrely.
The other problem with this question is they're asking something they can't do. Alberta can't unilaterally secede. That was the whole point of the reference question, is there has to be a consultation process that involves Indigenous treaty holders, rights and title. That's been a big contention in Alberta, with First Nations immediately starting to protest Danielle Smith because she wasn't consulted, and they're like, we don't want Alberta to leave Canada, but we have treaties with the Crown, and this threatens those, so fuck off. And to which she actually did back down a little bit and said there would have to be some consultation, but that didn't appease anyone.
Yeah, there'd be an interesting question of whether or not Alberta would be considered a successor. That would also be some responsibilities to honor those treaties. But this is one of those things where, Supreme Court references and federal legislation in the Clarity Act can be interesting, can help shape things, but, when push comes to shove, I'm not sure they're actually going to be all that constraining if a referendum does end up passing on this. That Supreme Court reference was, in part trying to figure out something that wasn't exactly written into the Constitution for what the mechanism would be. And beyond that, it's the sort of thing that is much more amenable to, or much more likely to be determined by what happens immediately after, with the facts on the ground do other countries quickly recognize Alberta's sovereignty in that case as an independent country? Does the Alberta government effectively exert control over border checkpoints, the various institutions within the governmental institutions within the province, all of that stuff that is much more a case of like raw politics and power than it is a question of legalese on that stuff. And there is a strong, moral argument on the people should have the right to self-determination for themselves, which would make it tough to try and then constrain the ability of the province to separate if there is a very clear expression of that. Anyway.
But it's that last point that's so critical, right? What is a clear expression? What if the result of that question is 50.1% and turnout is 30%?
Yeah,
the rest of Canada says eat dirt, right?
Oh yeah, and this is where things definitely have the chance to spiral out. But I'm just saying, like, if you read what the PQ was saying back in 95, or later said about what they were thinking in 95, they were planning on basically moving as quickly as possible to do everything they could to shore up their independence. They weren't going to wait for, a negotiation process. They were going to declare that night that they were now independent and, basically try and force Canada's hand on that. And there ought to be an expectation, if you're wargaming this one out, that that's a very likely scenario. Hopefully.
The problem is, like, the UCP doesn't according to Danielle Smith, she's not an open supporter of this. She's willing to let it happen. Whereas in 95 in Quebec, you had the Parti Québécois who was actively advocating for it.
Yeah, but
now she's slimy as hell and will definitely move to wherever the majority and she can get her most power. But it does make you wonder what planning is happening in her office. Like, so far, I think the best analysis, and I've seen it come from multiple places, is she's kind of like David Cameron in the pre-Brexit. Like, let's just get this vote over to, like, let the anger find its vent, and they'll vote no, and we can move on.
Yeah, and
also distract from all the other scandals happening in Alberta.
And that's definitely part of it. And yeah, I've also seen the analysis that's basically she's trying to tightrope walk a middle ground on all of this, in that if there's a success, she gets to say, yeah, I helped shepherd this along. I made it easier to get the referendum passed, all that. If it fails, she gets to say, you guys had your chance, but, I didn't support this. Good, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. There's definitely trying to place herself to exploit either outcome of this. But, if it
passes, she's fucked.
I'm not sure of it. I think she would pretty quickly try and stay on and become the, president of Alberta or whatever. But yeah, if, 30 days out, it's looking like it's going to pass, I would bet a lot of money that there was a lot of active preparation to take action immediately on that. But yeah, that definitely, of course, yeah, it does leave the question of what would Canada do, and
we would make it very hard.
Yeah.
We would try to punish them. We would not let them have citizenship. We would not, because as soon as you let Alberta go, Quebec's going.
Yeah, I mean, there's definite interest in that. I don't know. I found it so interesting how many people seem to express the view that Canadian citizenship was something like so sacred and unable to be violated that even if an entire province votes en masse to leave the country, to no longer be Canadian, no longer be part of the country, that the citizenship would just remain. There would be no changes to that. There would be still an entitlement to it, and that just seems so backwards.
Like, historically, there's analogs for that. Canada didn't have Canadian citizenship when we became a country. People were just British subjects.
Yeah, although in Canada, like several of the other dominions, had this like very long, drawn out, incremental process where like one step at a time. There was not a like clear, bright line on like, this is the day where we're changing everything over.
Yeah, and maybe that's what they want for Alberta, or they view dual citizenship as an option, as I think exists in some like US and British territories still to this day, as that like gradual process. I agree with you. I don't think this would be a gradual process. It would be chaotic and messy, and it would be to the detriment of Alberta for many reasons. Most notably, it's a landlocked province that the rest of Canada has no interest in granting, access to the shores easily or cheaply, whereas we kind of do now. Yeah.
But also, like, if you, express a desire not to be Canadian more, I think Canada should take them at their word for it. And yeah, the citizenship goes with it at that point. And if they also do through the negotiations, there's not going to be any CPP coming after that or anything.
And CPP is particularly challenging because it has built into it, as far as I know, the 750 rule that 7% of 7 of the 10 provinces representing 50% of the people have to agree to changes to that structure. And so it becomes a mess if Alberta wants to get any money out of that. Yeah. Stuart Press, friend of the pod, has a great piece on this that we'll link to in the show notes. We'll link to a couple others as well. One I liked that is also not going to be very well moving forward is Emmett McFarlane arguing that we need more centralization in Canada, a stronger federal government, because provinces are misbehaving and stuff. It's a very central Canada op-ed, but that's what you'll get from someone from Ontario.
Yeah, I
don't
also
don't 100% disagree with them.
I don't find the provinces aren't enacted my preferred policy outcomes. Therefore, the federal government should do more to insert itself into areas of clear provincial jurisdiction and be very compelling.
I think the fundamental thing I take away from it and these broader discussions is like federation is not it requires updates. It's not working great.
Yeah,
and it's overdue for some like broad constitutional discussions that no one's really willing to have, but we really need.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's definitely a lot of things that, might have made sense when drafting the British North America Act, but are not particularly well suited to the modern day. I mean, one of those ones that just comes to mind is like such an obvious one is securities are regulated provincially. Like, imagine in the US, instead of the SEC, you had 50 different people, 50 different organizations regulating the stock market there. That thing would be a nightmare. The only reason why it's like semi-coherent is you have only 10, and the exchange is primarily based out of Toronto, but like it becomes a real headache on that stuff. A whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah, ideally there would be a serious look at like either moving some stuff up to the federal level, moving some stuff down, clarifying some of the provisions that have kind of quite arguably gone away from the original intent of them based on like a series of court precedents, interprovincial trade being the main one that comes to mind there, where the what was the case? It was Gold something or another, but basically a case in the 30s that gave some pretty wide latitude to provinces to basically do anything short of put in a tariff on goods from another province on there. Like, that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. It's pretty contrary to the intent of creating a single unified market in the country. So like, there's a lot of space to do a bunch of stuff like that. I know some people would love to see the notwithstanding clause taken out. I think that's, by any likely configuration of the people and governments engaged in the negotiations, a absolute non-starter. There's no way you would get everyone you would need to on board with that, but there would no doubt be a lot of discussion on ways to update the charter too. It's a giant can of worms, but particularly the older provisions are probably due for an update.
So, Alberta, don't fuck this up. And Canada, let's do better.
And that has been Politicoast. Find links to everything we talked about at politicoast.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicoast. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicoast is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.